WP.org.
1010 WOLB Baltimore and WERQ FM HD3 Baltimore.
The views and opinions of the guest and host you hear are not necessarily those of the staff and management of Radio 1, its sponsors, or advertisers.
Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of the DMV Daily Radio Show. I'm your host, Hassan Giordano, Mr. Politics, back in the building today for a special Tell the Truth Tuesday program. Sitting across from me is my main man, my main apple scrapple, as always, Mark McLaren, in the building as usual. Good afternoon, sir.
Hello. Happy Tuesday.
So we're short. We got our producer, Jason Rodriguez, in the back holding us down as usual.
Good afternoon, family.
Our legal eagle, Ivan Bates, is not in the studio today, but he has definitely helped to produce this show. Today is going to be a special day, so we're going to do things a little different. We're going to invite the callers, as usual, to call in about today's conversation, but we need you to keep it brief. No soliloquies, no long. We want to get straight to the point because there's a lot of information that needs to be covered, and we'll only have 60 minutes to do it. We want to start by putting our advertisers up front. This program, as you know, is owned, operated, and produced by DMV Daily Media Group, Maryland's premier communication firm, specializing in radio, television, online productions. Get your message heard each and every day by advertising right here on the DMV Daily Show. If you want your business or message heard by thousands of people on multiple streams, such as iTunes, Spotify, Alexa, Facebook, Periscope, YouTube, Google Play, TuneIn, each and every day, make sure you contact them today. Info at dmvdaily.news. The number, 443-294-3900. Again, this show is also brought to you by Politicom Strategic Solutions, successfully helping candidates get elected since the 1970s. Politicom has mastered the art of political communications and become Maryland's premier campaign consulting firm. If you're seeking to get elected in 2020, whether it be here in Baltimore City or across the country, make sure to contact them today. 240-242-7050 for that. This show is also brought to you by that powerhouse union known as SEIU 500, who want you to know that Together We Rise is not just a slogan, but rather a blueprint for the future of the union movement. Visit them today at www.seiu500.org. And of course, last but certainly not least, it's brought to you by that powerhouse legal team known as Bates & Garcia Law Firm, specializing in criminal defense, real estate, and bodily injury cases. Bates & Garcia is Maryland's legal dream team. Contact them today for your free consultation, 410-814-4600. Now, as we talked about, today is a special program, and we're going to get right into it. In 1999, a young Asian high school student by the name of Heyman Lee went missing on January 13th. Days later, a body was found in Baltimore's infamous Lincoln Park. Accused of the crime was her former boyfriend, 17-year-old Pakistani Muslim by the name of Adnan Sayed, who as of today, Tuesday, November 13th, 2018, has been incarcerated for 19 years, 8 months, and 16 days for a crime it does not appear that he even committed. The key witness in this case, who most wouldn't even consider a friend of Adnan's, Jay Wild, testified that he assisted in helping Adnan dispose of the body, giving a detailed account of the day's events, though his story changed often. The other damning evidence was the cell phone tower data, which back then wasn't as reliable as today, even though it's still not that reliable. But despite a rather flimsy and circumstantial case, the jury still decided to convict Mr. Sayed as for first-degree murder, robbery, kidnapping, and false imprisonment, sentencing him to life plus 30 years. This case was brought to the world's attention in 2014 by a podcast known as Serial. The 12-episode first season was downloaded more than 100 million times, making it by far one of the most listened to podcasts in the world. The information provided in this podcast shed doubt on the likelihood of Adnan Sayed being guilty of this crime, and the post-conviction hearing was heard by retired Circuit Court Judge Martin Welch And it held that, among other things, Adnan's trial counsel, a woman by the name of Cristina Gutierrez, was deficient for failing to investigate a woman by the name of Asia McClain. You'll hear that name often today as a potential alibi witness. But that such deficiency did not prejudice Sayed's case. However, he did find that Adnan deserved a new trial on the basis that trial counsel was ineffective for failing to properly challenge the reliability of cell phone tower location evidence. However, the state decided to appeal that decision, which was upheld by Maryland's Court of Special Appeals, but on the grounds that Sayed's Sixth Amendment right to effective assistance of counsel was violated, based more so on the potential alibi witness. So here we are today. The appeal process by the state was handled by an attorney within the Maryland Attorney General's office by the name of Tharu Vignaraja. Yeah, you got it. That Democratic candidate for state's attorney we just saw in Baltimore City a few months ago, who ran on a platform that prosecutors should distinguish between youth offenders who would benefit from second chances, like Adnan, and those repeat violent offenders, which we know he certainly isn't, and yet he is hell-bent on trying to prevent Adnan from receiving a new trial, even to the degree that he no longer works as an assistant attorney general. He's actually a private attorney working for DLA Piper, and yet he is still the attorney that will be handling the appellate case that will be heard later this month regarding Judge Welch's original decision granting a new trial, which in and of itself seems somewhat unethical as an attorney working for one of the largest firms in the country, and you're still allowed to try this case for the state. Joining us in the studio today to talk about these issues are two women who have been at the center of this case, one from the very beginning, another one who came along, and they have been fighting to prove that Adnan has innocent. Rabia Chaudry, a friend of the Sayed family, an immigration attorney, a New York Times best-selling author, and host of the podcast Undisclosed, is with us, as well as Amelia McDonell-Parry, a Rolling Stones reporter and contributor to the Undisclosed Podcast. They join the DMV Daily Show today to break it all down, the facts of the case, answer the questions that you may have, the listeners, regarding this case, and to discuss the upcoming pending appellate case set to go before the Maryland's highest court, the Court of Appeals, this November, on November 29th. Ladies, welcome to the DMV Daily Show.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, we're just right.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming all this way and bringing this information to us. It's certainly a compelling case. Whether you listen to the podcast, which is, I had to listen to it twice. It was just that.
I was going to ask which podcast. Yeah.
Well, Undisclosed is the best. I mean, if you want to talk about it.
Good answer.
But all this was brought to the attention of the nation, really, and really of the world. And had it not been, who knows what be happening right now in Adnan's case. Rabia, tell us, you've been working on this from day one, right? And how does the situation for the listeners who don't know, who haven't heard the Serial Podcast or the Undisclosed Podcast, bring us up to today? What happened, how we got to today, and some of the more revealing circumstances in this case?
Well, that's a lot to go through, but very basically speaking, my connection to the case is that Adnan has been my younger brother's best friend. So I knew him kind of just as a kid hanging around the house. I knew Adnan since he's about 13, 14 years old. At the time he was arrested, he was 17. That was 1999. I was in my first year of law school. I lived in Virginia. I was married. I just wasn't in the area. But I was following this case of this young woman who had disappeared from Woodlawn High School, Hayman Lee. And then when Adnan was arrested, it was kind of a shock to me because I knew Adnan and also the community. It's a very tight-knit Muslim community in the Woodlawn area. And it was really the first time in the whole community that anybody had been arrested, I think, for anything, much less a violent offense and something like of this degree. And he was a juvenile on top of that. So I was in law school. There wasn't a lot I could do legally, but I was there to support the family. I followed the trials. I visited Adnan all the time. I just, was there kind of as a big sister. Like I said, he's a lot younger than me. And I remember sitting through, the first trial was a mistrial. The second trial, I thought was a complete sham, and it was a disgrace because his defense counsel was clearly impaired. Even as a second year law student, I was like, what is happening here? Because I could win this trial. She was literally at the end of her cognitive abilities, and she did not too long after die, and was disbarred as well. And so he was convicted. He was sentenced to life plus 30 years of killing this girl. And the state's theory was that the state's theory was based around his identity as a Muslim, that he is a Muslim, and so this is an honor killing. She rejected him, and it's an honor killing. And it was just shocking because what the arguments they were making is, on one hand, he's dating her because they dated for 6 months. He's dating her, smoking pot, partying like a teenager does in this country. On the other hand, he's like this regressive Taliban-like figure who's gonna, like, you can't have it both ways, but they did. And it worked because you had a jury that just didn't understand what was being thrown at them, and it scared them.
And the funny thing is, my 12-year-old son, who's Muslim, Malik, when he heard this, he listened to the podcast with me. Yeah. And the first question out of his mouth was, Daddy, did they convict him because he's Muslim?
Yeah.
This is a child talking, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, in the first trial, the judge actually asked the defense counsel, before the trial begins, he says, my understanding is, Ms. Gutierrez, is that his religion is a factor in this case. And she said, yes, Your Honor. That was his defense counsel. So he was screwed to begin with. Anyhow, after that happened, after he was convicted, the day he was convicted, I remember I was there. It was devastating. We just didn't think it was going to happen. And then I went to him at some point and I said, I think it was the same day actually, and I said, Adnan, the state's arguing that it was like this 20, 30-minute window of time in which you killed her. All you had to do was remember where you were in those 20, 30 minutes. Now, this is way before smartphones and anybody has electronic proof of where they are. But he remembered this young woman named Asia McLean had written him a letter when he was arrested, and she was another girl at the high school, saying, I remember being with you at the library after school that day. Like, very specific memory. She had written him twice. I said, send me those letters. I want to contact her. He's like, well, I had given the letters to my lawyer. So the lawyer, said that it didn't check out. I contacted Asia, and Asia's like, nobody contacted me. No lawyer, no police officer. She's like, nobody. She's like, I didn't know what was happening. And, the other thing we have to understand is the way a criminal trial works is people do not get off of work and school to attend these trials. They have no idea what's happening, right? There's like 6 people in the courtroom. These proceedings happen, and at the end of the day, if a person's convicted, people think, oh, they must have had some real evidence against him. Nobody in the community, nobody in the school actually knew what was happening in the courtroom. And Asia felt the same way. She's like, I figured they got him with some real evidence, and I was like, there was nothing, really. And so she gave me an affidavit. This is in 2000. So since that time, we have been fighting in the appellate courts, which takes forever. And in 2013, we finally got to the stage where we would be able to bring Asia in as a witness that nobody ever talked to before. But what happened was Asia refused to come. And so it was devastating because we waited all these years to present her, and she just didn't want to be part of it after all these years. And so then I said, you know what? We were waiting for the judge to rule, but I was like, we were going to lose. So I was like, we need a journalist to investigate this case and find us new evidence to get us back into court because we're going to lose on this. And that's where Serial happened. I just went online and I looked for anybody who had written about the case back in the 90s, and Sarah Koenig had written about his lawyer being disbarred and stuff. So I contacted her, and she was like, within a week, she was pretty interested, and that turned into a 10-month-long investigation, which turned into Serial. Yeah, and since Serial, by the way, I just want to, some of the data online is not accurate, but Serial's been downloaded, I think, about 600 million times. And Undisclosed has been downloaded, like, I think, around 260 million times.
Nice.
Like, the numbers are ridiculous. It's like global. But since Serial happened, me and 2 other lawyers created Undisclosed, where we do a really deep legal dive. And one of the lawyers found evidence that helped his conviction get overturned in one court. 2 courts have overturned his conviction. But he is still in prison because Thiru will not stop prosecuting the case. I really think it comes down to this one man.
And that's it is. And that's kind of the question is, how does one man have this amount of, I don't even say prestige or power, because I don't think he has that, but there's somebody who's allowing this man, who's no longer in the Attorney General's office, to allow to try. Now, mind you, he just ran for state's attorney. He was this kumbaya, I'm going to let all these people, young people, we got to. That just doesn't seem like the same man trying to keep Adnan from that new trial.
It's not. I mean, maybe Brian Frosh will give us a call and let us know why he keeps letting Thiru Vinaraja
and also why nobody else in the Attorney General's office will actually touch the case.
Yeah.
Why don't you have one of your actual lawyers do it?
Yeah,
that's the real question.
Yeah, it's very strange.
And it's not clearing him. I want the family to understand this. It's not as if the courts have said, okay, it's time for him to go. They're giving him a new trial, which I think anybody who listens and knows the information realizes a new trial, he's going to go home. He's going to get found not guilty by a reasonable amount. But at the end of the day, this guy's arguing against him even having that new trial. Mark, we going to
Yeah, no, I mean, my first question is really about Theroux. And I guess, as someone that observed the state's attorney's race and have had the opportunity to observe him, I mean, this guy is just, it takes a special person to make me sympathize with Project Veritas, okay? but this guy is a piece of work. What I'm really not understanding is, why is it that he's allowed to continue in this kind of extra prosecutorial role? It's something that, I'm not an attorney, but I don't think I've ever seen before, that this guy has gone on, to 2 successive positions after the Attorney General's office. But yet when this case comes up for rehearing, he's the only guy that can do it again. I mean, I guess maybe it's a question for the Attorney General, but I would really like some understanding as to how exactly he's continuing to function in this role.
I mean, it's given me the impression that he has basically been told, or my impression is basically that the AG's office would maybe drop the case if Theroux didn't want it, but Theroux still wants it. So
I mean, Theroux is a pro bono prosecutor. I have never heard of that before in my life. And I want to ask DLA Piper, by the way, this international law firm, what are you doing? You're talking about Project Veritas. I mean, that alone, those videos, and I'm not going to get into the substance of it. People can look it up. But the point is, this guy has a history of questionable behavior when it comes inside the courtroom, outside the courtroom. On this case, I don't understand. I am at some point going to reach out to the Maryland Bar Ethics Committee and be like, how does this happen? How does somebody get the power of the state who is not actually a state agent? I have not met another lawyer who's actually seen this happen either. So I don't know how this happens. I mean, unless you're appointed like a special counsel, I think, but I don't even know if that's happened. But I also wonder again, why is nobody else in the Attorney General's office? You have lawyers in your office. Why is nobody handling this case? Why is he so invested in it? And I will say this. I have been told by people who are connected to his campaign and then very quickly got disconnected from the campaign that he had his eye on this case for a while, thinking that this would help position him to run for the district attorney's office, the DA's run. And I learned this after he announced his candidacy, and I was shocked and horrified to know that he was running. I never thought he would actually win, but the idea that he would then be in the position, if Adnan actually went to trial, he would be the DA who'd be controlling that trial. That
would
terrified
be scary.
me. It'd be scary, yeah.
I don't think people realize or may not remember what a quintessentially Baltimore story this is. Like, we are in a studio that is literally like
100 yards.
200 yards from Woodlawn High School.
Right.
We're, probably 500 yards from the infamous Best Buy trunk pop. This story is Baltimore through and through. When I come to the studio every day, I go through Leakin Park. This is just like, it's amazing to me. That's why I kind of geeked out on this, is because it's so quintessentially Baltimore. And so I'm so grateful you two are here to kind of remind folks about what it's about, because I think sometimes we start hearing about the larger legal issues and we forget that this is, a young Muslim kid in Woodlawn that has been victimized, no question, by the system. Regardless, I've listened to everything. I don't know 100% that he's not guilty. I wasn't there. What I do know is that they didn't prove he was guilty. You know what I mean? And that's what anyone is entitled to. And so, I'm hoping that the folks in Baltimore that aren't engaged on this will get engaged on this and bring some pressure on the correct folks to be pressured. I'm actually surprised at Attorney General Brian Frosh. We have a political relationship with him, but I've also had a personal relationship with him for a long time, and I have a lot of respect for him, and I've never had a conversation with him about this, but I would like to be able to understand that he has normally been kind of the model of fairness, so I don't know why he's, all the way. Have you guys had conversations with him, or it's just strange?
He would probably slap a restraining order on me if I tried to have a conversation. I'm too close to the case. I can't be talking to people like that. But I will say this. The way the state's operating is actually very, very common in terms of how wrongful convictions operate. When you look at the Making a Murderer case, right, and anybody who followed that case, in that case you have 2 defendants. Now, one of them you can maybe make the argument about Stephen Avery's culpability, but Brendan Dassey, who was a juvenile at the time, and an impaired juvenile, the state fought and fought and fought and fought to make sure, basically, he's going to stay in prison and die in prison, or at least be old in prison, right? He's not going to get out till he's like 60 years old. And this is what the state did in the West Memphis 3 case. The state has taxpayer dollars, which they keep throwing away on these kinds of things. Basically, I mean, like, this is the 3rd appeal the state has filed that we're now fighting now. And every time they do this, it tacks on another year and a half to Adnan's being in prison. He cannot get bail as long as these appeals are ongoing. His parents are getting older. I mean, the toll it takes on families, but this is actually not uncommon. I would be surprised if Brian Frosch was like, we took a look, because what ends up happening is the state, and Thiru does this, he takes the facts that were presented in 1999 and pretend like that is still the existing, those are still the existing facts, so they're not. A lot of new facts have come out, including the state's only witness coming out and basically saying I lied about this stuff, and the whole that it happened in a whole different way. So that's like, well,
that's my question, and I'm sure you're talking about Jay Wilds.
I'm talking about Jay Wilds, yeah.
Listening to this, right, from a layman just sitting back and no interest in this case, I would suspect he did it. Like, here's a guy who lied all the way through. He lied to the police multiple times. His story changed not only to the police, but on trial. They were completely different. He was the one who apparently the shovels that were used were his. Mm-hmm. That he disposed of his clothes the day after. I don't never remember getting rid of his clothes afterwards. But yet they appear to meet his girlfriend Jennifer afterwards. There's no dirt on their clothes. There's nothing like they dug a ditch or did any of this stuff. But here's a guy who, to me, either did it and maybe involved some way Adnan, or Adnan just didn't have a clue that he did this, and he just felt like, okay, I did it, so I'm going to put everything on him. Why was he ever charged in any of this?
No, and he got quite a few kind of favors, and
he had a long criminal history in which he's actually never had to serve a day in jail.
And Adnan had none, correct?
Right. No, Adnan's never had any criminal. He's not only never had a criminal history in 20 years in prison. Almost, he's never had like any kind of violent incident. Like, he's just never had a fight in prison, which is almost unheard of. But I'm going to tell you why this is also a quintessential Baltimore story, because the possibilities you presented with Jay Wilds, neither one of them are actually true. Jay Wilds was a young black man, a young black kid, a 19-year-old kid in Baltimore in the 90s. And we know it's happening today, but in the 90s, there are so many exoneration cases that are coming to light now that happened back in the 90s. Same set of detectives. They would corner a young black male, and they would coerce witnesses.
Right.
Same detectives, right? Yep. And this is what happened. Jay Wilds, the lawyer who represented him in 1999, a couple of years ago, finally emailed me and said, what happened was, Jay Wilds was told by the prosecutor, Kevin Yerrick at the time, who was a white guy, he said, I'm going to charge you in the county, which is a white county, and I'm going to ask for the death penalty, because Maryland had the death penalty then. Mm-hmm. And Jay Wilds is now up against the wall. He's like, it's either that, or you're going to become state's witness. His father had been in prison, his brother's in and out of prison. What were his options, right? He's like, I'm going to get slapped with this murder. This guy. Now, it could be enough if I was advising Jay Wilds at the time, I'd be like, they have nothing on you. The only thing they have on Jay is his own statement. There is no evidence linking Jay to the crime. There's no evidence linking Adnan to the crime. Simple as that. So that's also part of the Baltimore story.
I'm very sympathetic, even though, whatever he's been through, I'm sympathetic to Jay. Like, if you listen to him, he clearly is like a guy that's in over his head for whatever reason. In my mind, I would say he probably, neither one of them had anything to do with it. The only thing that gives me pause is, how did he know where Heyman's car was? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on believing that the police really did get that information from Jay.
Yeah, okay.
Or it could be a person who maybe thinks that the cops found it on their own and let Jay lead them to it, quote unquote.
Let Jay lead. You know what? Okay, that explains a lot.
I mean, we have contemporary evidence that Baltimore police, and these cultures last for decades. This is not like new, right? That they are willing to plant evidence in certain cases, that they're willing to. And in this situation, they had already, Adnan was their mark. Before even her body was found, the records show they were already investigating Adnan. They didn't even know what happened to her. Mm-hmm. And so Adnan was a mark. They had to make it happen. And in my book, there's a section in which I lay out exactly what happened on the day that the car was found in the county and in the city. It was found in the city, but stuff was happening in the county. Like, there's documents showing that they had found some evidence in the county. It's like, what is the evidence? Well, the document actually says vehicle. Mm-hmm. So Yeah, and I it's in the book, so you know what I mean. So it's like, oh, that's interesting, and
I'm not sympathetic to Jay at all. I mean, this guy
Come
had
on,
an
he's a
elaborate
19-year-old kid
I don't care.
that got hemmed up in Baltimore County
You don't
and told that he could face
elaborately
the death penalty.
Put
Come on,
something
Hassan.
like this on somebody else.
Well,
now, if you did it
Hassan,
on
it happens
yourself,
every
then
day.
God bless you.
It happens
No.
every day.
I mean, I think
Absolutely
it's
not.
possible that the police could have very easily kind of convinced Jay that Adnan was involved.
Right.
And so
I
then
think
there's
that's
that
what it
feeling
is.
of like,
Then I'm not
I'm helping.
putting anything on anyone. That's right.
Jay said in his only recent interview, which was a couple of years ago, he's like, I was told that the trunk pop happened at Best Buy. Like, I think the police told him that Adnan did it. We can't nail him unless you help us, type of thing. And I think
And
he
if
might be
you don't
convinced.
help us, we're going to go after you.
How do you strangle somebody in the middle of the day at Best Buy parking lot is wide open
It's
and
wide
people
open.
know it, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But it's in a
And then
it's a secluded
then
place.
right. Then you take the woman out who's athletic. She's not some little girl like she's clearly. And you take her and you put her in a trunk in the middle of the day. Nobody sees you. Nobody knows anything. Well, we got to go to the phone line.
Yeah,
I want
they
to
are.
clear the phone line.
You guys have
got a
got
lot
the
to talk
phones
about.
buzzing.
Oh, God, I'm scared.
Don't be scared.
Roland Brown, welcome to the DMV Daily Show.
Oh, thank you. How are you?
Just right. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Well.
You got a question?
Now, I'm calling about Farouk and basically his nature and his style. And I just wanted to say that, if you look at Farouk, you can look at him in two ways. I would consider him an evil genius, and some people like to have an evil genius on their team. And I heard the conversation about asking Mr. Frost about why he's having Farouk go through with this case is because he is a special person in that he has that rare combination of ultra intelligence with charisma. I had a case with him in which we went through a case. It was a murder case. My client had proffered to him, which means had gave him information. And then Farouk went around and charged my client after he told him what happened, and he told him he wouldn't charge him. And then after that, Farouk, when we went to trial, in his evil genius way, he got the judge to breach the proffer. In other words, use the man's words against him in court, Wow. And he won the case that day, but the case ultimately came back on appeal, and everything was overthrown. So I can understand how people consider him to be a person that's unfair. And I always thought that as a defense attorney, our reward is payment. And as a prosecutor, what is your reward? And the reward is actually winning. And he's the guy that I've learned that will do anything, anytime to win now. And that's what I wanted to share with you.
Thank you so much.
Sounds
You're the
accurate to
first
me.
person I've ever heard call him charismatic, but okay, go ahead.
Right.
That's a new take.
Right.
Well, Farouk is very charismatic. I've
what way?
never seen
Shape
him
I
or
don't get
form.
that.
God, he is like the definition of smarm.
Thank
Okay,
you.
there
Yeah,
is
he
no
gives me
charisma at all.
chills.
Have you seen him on a campaign trail?
I've seen him on countless campaign events.
I
is-
would differ.
ugh.
I would
Yeah.
differ with that one.
He-
Jeremy, welcome to the DMV Daily Show.
Hi, thank you for having me. Long-time listener, first-time caller. How are you guys?
Well, thanks
Welcome.
for calling in, and thanks for listening as well.
I'm a former prosecutor, and I'm a current trial attorney in the city. And the reason I'm calling in is very simple, which is, the closer we got to the election, especially with the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, I had several women come out of the woodwork who were all colleagues of Farouk's. And all three of these women really suffered the same issue with him, which is they found him abusive. They found him to be sexist. And every one of them I begged to come forward. No different than what happened in the Kavanaugh hearings. And every one of them said the same thing to me, which is, I worked for Farouk or I worked with him. I have a good job, and he's going to retaliate against me. And unfortunately, none of those women were able to come forward and say it. But what we have here is there's a pattern here where every time that Farouk Vighnaraja works with women, we end up hearing the same story over and over and over again, which is he calls me late at night. He shows up at my house unannounced. And this was actually known quite well through his campaign as well, with some of his campaign employees, one of which I met with. So, this is something that's pervasive, and I wish it would have come out at the election because it's something that has to be exposed. And moreover, the taxpayers are funding this prosecution where he's being specially brought in with Thrush. And these are my tax dollars at work. So we have somebody who I believe is abusive towards women. He's not an employee of the Attorney General's office, and this is a taxpayer-funded prosecution through him. So I just think that at some point we got to wake up and smell the coffee here as far as what he's truly like and what his really character is like here.
Wow, thank you.
Agree.
And I'm going to tell you something. Jeremy is, I know who that is, right? I don't know if he wants us to put out his last name, but he is one of the most respected defense attorneys in this. If it wasn't for
I think I
Ivan
know
being the
what
first
Jeremy.
call, that would be my second call for a defense attorney. So for him to say something like that, you can really take. And Roland is as well, who called in the first time. So
And that's something
LaToya
I've heard
Francis
too.
Williams.
Though.
Yeah.
That's something I've heard as well about through certain sort of channels that I knew that women weren't comfortable coming forward, but I heard
And that's the big shame
stories.
here,
Yeah.
is that they're afraid that he can retaliate. I mean, this is the power dynamic that still exists, and the fact that this didn't come out in the campaign. I mean, thank God he didn't win. But I don't know what his career is going to look like. I have a feeling he's not going to leave Baltimore politics. So I hope at some point that they have the courage, or are given the courage and support.
And I don't want to harp too much on Project Veritas, but there's a reason that's the way they came at him. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like,
Right.
he has to have a reputation that way. That's how he got caught up in that situation. They don't just pick something out of a bag to
You're
see
right.
what will tempt you into doing something unethical.
Right.
They knew that was the way to get to him, and there's a reason why they knew that.
And that it would be easy to do it. I
Yes.
mean, I think they
Yeah.
marked him specifically for a specific reason.
Yes.
speaking of state's attorney, right? So if this case, and then we're going to go back to the phone line, if this case is upheld and they allow for a new trial, right? Have you spoken to our current state's attorney, Marilyn Mosby, and has their office in any way given any indication whether they will move forward with a new trial or just dismiss it altogether?
No. I mean, Mosby's office has made absolutely no comment on it. And I think that's actually the proper thing to do until and unless we get to that point.
I reached out to her office when during the campaign. I had interviewed Ivan actually for Rolling Stone about about the Adnan case, and he was basically kind of coming forward to say that he thought that Adnan deserved a new trial and that the AG's office should stop fighting it. And I reached out to both Theroux's campaign and to Miss Mosby's campaign, and their response was that they basically deferred me to the AG's office, which was not what I was asking, but alrighty.
So, real quickly, what I don't understand is if the case has been technically overturned, right? So now we're in the posture where he hasn't been convicted of anything, and he has no criminal record, a clean, kind of bill of health in the correctional context. Why can't he get bail?
And should have been granted bail the first time, but they got his age wrong.
Right.
I don't understand why, on what basis they hold him.
Well, we did apply for bail when the conviction was overturned the first time by Judge Welch. We applied directly to Judge Welch, and his order in denying it's really odd. He denied the bail application, but it was actually quite favorable denial, because in the denial he said, "I find that Adnan is not that he's not a threat to anybody. He's not a threat to himself. He's not a threat to society. He has a clean." He gave all the reasons that he would actually grant bail.
And didn't you have the community saying, "I'll put my property up," everything?
Yeah. I mean,
why is he still in there?
It's almost like he was vouching for Adnan's character and saying that he should. But then he said the thing is, as long as the appeals are ongoing, it was just the appeals. He's the state filed the appeal, so it kind of puts a hold on that entire status for him. The other thing is this. I mean, I will say this though. To be fair, if somebody's charged with first-degree murder, it is hard to get bail. Even if you have been convicted, you're just kind of waiting for trial, which is the way I can, right? It's not easy to get bail in those circumstances.
Yeah.
He was a juvenile. So, if we win this final appeal, which I think we will, but look, the hearing is November 29th, right? We're probably not going to get a decision until August. That's how hard this stuff is and how long it takes. But if we win that, that's kind of the end of the road for the state, unless they are ridiculous and decide to go to the U.S. Supreme Court, which I feel like Theo Vigneron must be I feel like he'd almost pay out of pocket to do it. I mean,
Thank you. That's what I think.
I don't know what's wrong with this man. I don't know. And he went to Woodlawn. He should know. And he, not only that, he doesn't even know the facts of the case very well. I mean, there's stuff that happens inside the courtroom. I'm like, have you even read the trial transcript? He doesn't even know.
Well, that's what I find so kind of bothersome about, his sort of investment in this case is that
It's superficial.
Yeah, because to me, it's the fact that Brian Frosh keeps putting him in charge of it, that he still is handling the case. I would expect that to be reflected in the arguments he makes in court and in his various court filings. And it is just not there. You find errors, or, misstatement of the facts. sloppiness.
Misrepresentations.
Yeah.
Deliberate misrepresentations.
You know, sloppiness across the board that to me they often read like they were written like the night before. And he frequently makes sort of the same arguments every time. Like, it's not like he's going back and through it and reading how the judges have sort of weighed in on this and thought, maybe I should strengthen this argument a little bit more this time around.
It's the same brief over and over. He files like every year.
Well, let's go to the boards because they are lit up.
Yes,
right
they
now.
are.
Justice, welcome to the DMV Daily Show. That's
Good name.
Yeah.
Hey, how are you guys?
Good. How are you?
Justice.
Good, thanks. I was a former prosecutor, and a couple of things. I'll try and hit some points briefly. One, don't forget Farouk clerked for a Supreme Court justice who was sitting on the Supreme Court. So he would love nothing more, I'm sure, than to go back and argue a case before the Supreme Court. Number two, you're asking the wrong questions. Somebody should be hammering away at Marilyn Mosby and the state's attorney's office, asking why in the world this case was allowed to leave the office in the first place. The Attorney General's office only handles appeals for Baltimore City. Post-convictions are always handled by the office that prosecuted the case.
I didn't know that.
This is completely unheard of. This has never happened before. So I'm sure the reason they don't have an answer is because it's never happened before.
Yeah.
But why do you think this would happen, Justice?
Right. When you become a prosecutor, you actually get sworn in by the clerk of the court. You take an oath. You get a badge. You have special protections against malpractice issues and conflicts issues that you don't have as a private attorney. So how this is all happening is beyond anyone that I know, anyone that I've talked to. Farouk's behavior has always been beyond unethical. He's been reversed so many times by the appellate courts for unethical behavior. And I personally watched him leaving the office, I'm going to say 10, 11 o'clock at night with at least 2 or 3 young interns that had no business being there that late. Prosecutors, there are a lot of us, well, I was a former prosecutor now, but that stay that late often because of being in trial, just the caseload alone. Never, as a law clerk or an intern, both for a judge and for the office, was I ever there that late. It was completely unacceptable and bizarre. His antics were very widely known as to his behavior with females, with women. He is very vindictive, and he can
He's gonna burn my house down after this radio show.
Yeah. It's like, honestly, it's very narcissistic. He can be very charming in the beginning to sort of bring you in, and then you realize that he is not at all what you thought. And as far as the evidence is concerned, it's interesting what you guys said. Generally, theories are formed, and then evidence that's collected or seen is molded to fit the theory that they've come up with. That doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it should happen, but it happens all the time.
Right.
And so, based on what all of you have said, it sounds like that's exactly what happened in this case.
It did, and that's why the prosecutor at the time said, we don't need to test the DNA evidence. They took a rape kit from her body. They took fingernail clippings. He put a hold on testing. None of the forensics were ever tested. In fact, that whole theory of he put her in the trunk of the car, even they knew it was bullshit because they didn't even test her trunk.
Yeah, the trunk liner or something. There should be some evidence she was ever in her own trunk.
They already knew that this is all bunk, and they protected the case by just not testing anything.
So I want to ask a question about the courts, right? We said November 29th is the hearing. Like you said, that doesn't, the courts of with the wheels of justice, they grind to a halt. So it could be till August of next year before we get that decision. But the special thing is the Court of Appeals, which is usually a 7-member, now the judge just actually left. Sally Atkins retired in October 30th. So if there is a 6-6 decision, hypothetically, would that uphold the lower court's decision and allow it to move forward with a new trial? How would that work with a missing judge?
You mean if it's a split decision?
Correct.
I have no idea, but
I think a tie affirms the lower court's ruling without an opinion. I'm almost sure.
I'm not sure.
The lower court ruling is good in our case.
So I'm correct.
So
I'm right. Okay. Yeah.
I think,
our legal expert says.
I don't know why I'm trying to answer that. But
As long as it's 3-3, then it's because the lower court did affirm that means that they want a new trial.
Right.
So that means
Twice.
as long as it's not a majority decision against that, then we're good.
Also, here's another question I have is, so, okay, we win in the Court of Appeals. Does he still stay in jail while they decide whether they're going to retry him and through the pendency of another trial? And
if we win the Court of Appeals, which I believe we will, then I think that is the absolute right time to apply for bail, and I think he would be granted bail at that time.
I'm just obsessed with the fact that this guy is
But look at the bail system in Maryland. See, we just changed because of the court's hearings. Right now, before people would get bails, but now it's either no bail, or we give you a limited bail. And I think, like you said earlier, because of the nature of the crime,
right,
it's likely that he may have to.
But here's the thing: the state would have to, if we win, the state has to decide fairly soon that we are actually going to go to trial, or we're going to let him go, drop charges, or we're going to give him a plea deal. They can't wait forever while they're deciding whether or not they're going to take this to trial.
I can't imagine they want to put Jay Wild back on the stand. I mean
that's
just
the reason
no way.
why they're fighting this so hard. It's they know they'll lose. They can't. They could go to trial again,
I don't
but it
even
would
really know whether he would
really
testify,
silly.
given his. I don't. Either way, I think he's shot as a witness. One other question I had. I know this is like the all the time show, but I really do have a question for you, or what your thoughts are about the guy who found Heyman's body. That has always bothered me that this guy is so
taking a leak in the park,
right?
In Lincoln
He's
Park,
taking a leak in Lincoln Park, but the body was like you couldn't see it very well, and it's like I think 127 feet from the road. So
not only that, it was on the opposite side of the road from which he was driving.
Right.
So he's driving in one direction. He pulls over his car. He walks across the street. He wasn't even driving on that side of the road.
And this is January.
Yeah.
In Baltimore, it's cold as a witch's tit, okay? You're going to get out of your car and walk way into the woods just to urinate?
He failed his first polygraph.
See, that guy gives me the
And they never looked into him.
And he has also had several convictions for streaking. Like, he takes all his clothes off and flashes women. Like, this guy, that could be your murderer there
that's
somehow,
streaking
some way.
is a big stretch from murder, though.
Right, but it just shows, there's some kind of problem that he has. He's not just, a work-a-day guy at Coppin State who took a leak.
I mean, the thing is, if he actually just found the body by accident, there's no way he did it. That's not the narrative. He did not pull his car over, then walk across the street, because there's woods on that side of it. I mean, you could take a leak on that side too. So I don't know what his deal is, but the police wanted to just get rid of him quickly, and they did. He failed the first polygraph. They changed the questions completely so he could pass the next one, and then they never talked to him again. That's it.
I mean, they didn't even look about the phone booth. That I never remember a phone booth at that Best Buy. Yeah. That baffled me today, and I used to go to that Best Buy all the time. But they never even go to the phone records.
Right.
You say he called from there. You don't go get the phone records.
I mean, you can see so much. You can understand so much about a case by looking at what wasn't done.
Yeah,
and in this case, it really
this guy who found the body, Alonzo Sellers, they didn't take his hair or fingerprints, nothing. They found 16 sets of fingerprints in her car that were never matched to anybody.
Right.
It's like, you want to check somebody else out?
The chances of that guy stumbling back there and finding that body that isn't even visible when you get up on it. I mean, the cartographer testified that he almost stepped on her. You know what I mean? Like, you were just, it's just bizarre. There's more to that.
Let's go back to the phone lines. Jennifer, welcome to the DMV Daily Show.
Hello.
Hello. You're on.
Oh, great. My name's Jennifer Hill, and thought I'd never say this, but a little bit of a shout out to Twitter, because I wouldn't have known about this show without it.
Awesome. Yay, Twitter.
Normally, I think it's like a big plus, but so I've always been just baffled by, like, Heyman's diary did not show that Adnan was ever obsessed with her, and there was no testimony that made him seem ever obsessed with her, and yet that seemed to be what was, emphasized over and over again. I even had friends after listening to Serial say, oh yeah, he was obsessed with her, and I never got that from Serial by itself.
I never did either, yeah.
Yeah. And so, I'd love to hear more about that and, sort of how it was discussed in the trials, but then also when I listened to Undisclosed, the part about lividity, I don't know how much of that came up in the trial, but to me that just that alone said Adnan couldn't have done it.
Right.
So anyway,
this is the arsenal we would go back to trial with, right? Yeah.
I mean, my thing about
I don't know if it just seems obvious to me because I listened to those podcasts and obviously I wasn't in the trials, listening, but yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Tell me if I'm stretching this too far to make a point about the first point that she made, and that is that I've always thought that this Adnan is obsessed with her is part and parcel of this anti-Muslim stuff. You know what I mean?
Totally agree.
It's not just about he was choosing his religion over her or her over religion.
Right.
It really is, look at this big, strange, dark man from a weird place where they treat women really badly and women are your property. And for me, it's like it's all the same fruit of the poisonous tree. You know what I mean? Like, and that's not talked about enough.
The evidence of it. I tried to tell Sarah Koenig this, and I think Sarah is not as familiar with these issues, and I wish you had been more familiar with these issues because, she was kind of like, well, I don't really know. The evidence, there was no testimony that Adnan was, but his identity was the evidence.
Yes.
That's what the state used. His identity as a Muslim male means all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
It means honor killing. It means obsessiveness. It means possessiveness. He gave her a scarf as a gift. I mean, they had this quacky cultural memo, in which this woman who is like some anti-Muslim bigot, but poses as a cultural expert, wrote that when a Muslim man gifts a scarf, it means he owns. I'm like, where is this from?
Exactly.
I have never
remember that.
I didn't know
that scarf.
I mean, it was shocking, and that's they built their case on that. And I think just the fact that I would ask Brian Frosch, this is a 17-year-old child who was unconstitutionally convicted based on his religious identity. For that reason alone, give him a new trial, even if you think he's guilty. For that reason alone, he'd deserve a new trial.
My feeling on the diary too was that I've since heard through reference certain like paragraphs or sentences in the diary, and I listened to them and I'm like, have you never met a teenage girl?
Yeah,
like if you read my diary could be used for all sorts of things. I mean, when you're a hormonal teenage girl, you're saying all sorts of sort of dramatic. I mean, you're writing your own love novel. It's not a reflective.
They did the same thing with Adnan with these school assignments where look at his dark side. I'm like,
kill.
A teen is like angst incorporated. Okay, that's all it is 24/7.
Speak of Asia McClain, we haven't gotten to her yet, but this is, for those who don't, this is, to me, that was like the glowing best witness you could have ever presented.
Yes. Amazing witness, yeah.
That even afterwards has come forward now, even in the last post-conviction, right? Who basically clears them of everything, right? How have y'all had a relationship since? Do you guys consistently talk, or just sparingly, or?
I never, since in 2000 I got the affidavit from her, I never touched her again because the last thing you want is to taint a witness, right? You don't want a witness to feel intimidated, tainted, and anything. I never touched her. I never communicated with her until after she testified, because once she's testified, it's on the record, right? It's there. And her testimony was fantastic. She's a solid witness. She has no bias. She has no skin in the game. Her story's been consistent throughout. And one of the big shames of this thing is you have a citizen coming forward saying the same thing she's been saying for 20 years. And this prosecutor, Theo Vignard, he held press conference. First of all, you have no business doing, why are you holding press conference right outside the courtroom? Held press conferences in which he maligned her and intimidated her and basically said that, she's either inserting herself in the case, she's lying, she's in cahoots with Adnan. I mean, if Adnan was trying to set up an alibi, why didn't he not call that alibi for the trial? He just wanted to wait 20 years.
Adnan, you're doing it wrong.
All wrong. This conspiracy has gone really wrong. So the fact that he would intimidate a witness in public like that is really shameful. And I know it's not the Theroux show, but we keep going back to him.
And then he went and dug up the Doublemint twins. Who are these two twins that were like, oh yeah, we've known her for a long time. She told us 20 years ago she was going to lie about this. That whole thing that's clearly some prosecutor digging around to get someone that's trying to insert themselves in the story.
And I would be curious to see whether or not those twins would actually say what Theroux says they're going to say, because Theroux has a habit of putting witnesses on the stand who don't actually say what they've been.
It's so nice.
That might be the fault, though, of the detective he tends to put in charge of these things.
Yeah.
Dedrick, welcome to the show.
Hello, welcome.
Dedrick. Hey, how you doing?
I'm well, and yourself?
Just right. You got a question?
Well, no, I just called to listen in, and if I had anything to interject to speak on Tharu and the injustice that I faced by the hands of that guy.
You faced it personally?
Personally.
Do
personally.
tell.
Are you a defense attorney, prosecutor, or were you a defendant?
I was a defendant.
Wow. And how did that happen?
Well, long story short, I was accused of some things by Tharu, which in fact he had absolutely no evidence towards, and he held my life up, destroyed my life. It took me approximately 3 years to be found not guilty.
Oh.
Wow.
17 postponements.
Oh my God.
Whoa.
17?
17.
That's tragic.
But when does a judge step in and say, you know what?
Right.
I've given you enough postponements. We got to move forward.
That's ironic. The very first case, the very first hearing, the judge stated that the case made no sense. He stated that when the warrants were signed, it wasn't for people who knew people, it was for people who were actually involved. So at that point, I was under the impression that my case would be dismissed, but he awarded a postponement and said he was going to allow him more time for an investigation.
That's insane.
And it actually took 3 years.
Wow.
Jeez.
And still nothing turned up. Meanwhile, throughout that 3 years, I lost my home, my car, my family. I couldn't be in. I lost my job, which I was employed. I was employed for 13 years, making a pretty decent income, roughly like $66,000 a year. Since then, still struggling to get my life back in order. Hasn't been a good road, but I discharged it to the judicial system.
Yeah.
And Tharu.
I mean, right to a speedy trial. What happened to that, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And that's the question. Does that, 180 days? I think is a speedy trial.
Mm-hmm.
If the decision comes down and it's overturned, which I'm not overturned, but it's upheld, and there's a new trial, does Adnan now have that 180-day window for them to decide whether they're going to give him that trial?
I mean, so I'm not a trial attorney, and I don't do criminal. Yeah, I've never done any of this stuff like in this city. But what I understand is that they would have like that window start to schedule the trial. This trial could actually, I think, be later.
Right.
But they have to start getting it on the docket. And that movement would tell us that they're going to try the case, right? I mean, like that's what we would know. I mean, with this gentleman, first of all, I'm so sorry to hear like what happened to him.
Yeah,
it is not an uncommon story. That's the thing. People's lives are destroyed as they're waiting to just get through the system. And these prosecutors have so much power. And people don't understand. If you're interested in criminal justice reform, start with the prosecutors.
Yes.
Get rid of these people. Do what Philadelphia did.
Yes.
Elect people who come from a background, who understand criminal defense, who have defended people, who understand like what the system does to people. Stop putting these same power-hungry, unethical people in these positions. Stop electing them.
So, Rabia, if we win in the Court of Appeals, who is it that makes the decision
I love
whether
that you say
to I am so geeked out, you have no idea. I'm ready to try the case. Put me in, I can play. But no. So, if Adnan wins the appeal, who decides whether to retry him, Frosh or Marilyn Mosby?
My understanding is Marilyn Mosby would decide the case. The thing is, but then as that lady said, that nothing's happening as normal in this case.
Right. So
if Frosh is like, I'm going to keep it, and I'm going to, I just don't know. But ordinarily, it would go to the district attorney.
Because an assistant AG try it in the city court, wouldn't that be weird?
Yeah, that
It'd be weird. I think my impression is that there maybe isn't anything that would prevent Brian Frosh from keeping the case, but that would be insanely abnormal.
Nothing would make me happier than for Maryland to specially assign Tharu to this case.
That ain't going to happen. I can guarantee you that. But it would be interesting how it's going to play. We got to get these callers in because we got 4 minutes left. Ivan Bates could be the special prosecutor. How about go ahead and tell her to advise that one. Russell, welcome to the DMV Daily Show.
Hey, good afternoon, guys. Great topic. Very quickly, I know we're short on time, but I think one of the things that has to happen is, number one, you got to look at it in two phases, the prosecutors and law enforcement. We've got to get out of the mindset of finding facts and do the fact finding. And in this case with Tharu, this guy's a piece of work. I mean, I've had a few cases with him before, and that's what he does. He will mold the facts and witnesses and everything to fit his theory of the case, regardless of innocence, regardless of what's plainly in his face. I don't believe that him calling bad witnesses are not calculated. He does it as a red herring to throw you off, and then we'll slide something under the radar. Winning at any cost is his thing, and I've met some very honorable prosecutors who, you know, I would go to bat for and vouch for, but this is one guy, man, that he will smile in your face, and the whole time has got a snake in the back of his hand.
I am asking every single person who's ever had a professional interaction with him, why do you not file ethics complaints against him?
I'm just about to ask that.
Please,
why is he still an attorney?
do it. Do it. He should lose his license. If all this stuff, all these allegations are true, he should lose his license.
Yeah, to me, this has become, and look, this show is not about, to me, it's about Adnan, right? Getting justice for him, getting him home and into justice. But, I mean, obviously, Tharu has some issues, right? No matter where you stand on this, something isn't right, and somebody has to investigate and look into this some way, somehow. Brooks, welcome to the show. Brooks?
Yes, hi. I'm an aspiring law student, so I have a question for Rabia. What has this case taught you about the justice system and about yourself?
That's an awesome question.
I mean, what has taught me about the justice system is that, look, and when it comes to wrongful convictions, it takes around 18 years to exonerate somebody. There's not a lot of justice in the justice system. There is systematic, institutionalized power against defendants. Everything is stacked against you. You could be made, you know, your whole life depends on maybe a lawyer who might not have the resource to defend you properly. There's a lot that has to be fixed, but I again believe that you have to start with the prosecutors, the people who decide who to charge, what to charge them with, what kind of sentencing to ask for. That's where you have to start with criminal justice reform. What has it taught me about myself is that on some things I'm a dog with a bone, and I'm just not going to let go. This is one of those things.
I love it.
Yeah, awesome question. Last caller, we got to wrap it up. Lisa Mills, welcome to the DMV Daily Show.
I just want to know, tell me something. So what do you think? Do you think Tharu is obsessed with the spotlight or the control? It seems to be a perception that he holds not only in the courtroom, but also in his personal life, that he's got to be the one. All eyes is on him, and he's going to control every situation. Tell me, what do you think he's more obsessed with, spotlight or the control?
I think he's got an ego that is, well, bigger than him, that's for sure. But I don't know. I think he has his eyes set on much higher offices. And so I think that the Adnan case was a way of drawing attention to himself in hopes of achieving those goals. Because before that, he was just, you know, nobody knew who he was. People still don't really know who he was.
Yeah, I mean, you got to, you know, I hate to go to family, but his sister ran for governor after being a low-level staffer for the First Lady. I mean, there's clearly a lot of ambition in that.
That was odd, yeah.
Yeah, there's clearly a lot of weird ambition in that family.
And both of them running at the same time. Usually one would say, okay, I'm going to come.
Neither of which had a chance at winning.
And we haven't even talked about the campaign finance stuff, which is another show.
Yeah. In and of itself. Well, ladies, thank you for coming on. So let me get, the question is to the family who's listening, how can people who are listening to the program be of help to Adnan in terms of the November 29th hearing? Is there anything that they can do? Did they come out and show support? Is he okay? I mean, how? To me, is my first question would be, how is the brother doing in jail?
He's doing okay. I mean, Adnan is like one of the most like even-keeled people, the kindest people. He spends 90% of his time asking like, hey, are you okay? You know. If things were not okay, he wouldn't even tell anybody he loves because he doesn't want to upset people. But he's hanging in there. And I will say this, when the conviction was overturned the first time, I was like, Adnan, you're coming home. I was like crying. He's like, Rabia, it's going to take some more time. He's like, he predicted then it'll take 2 to 3 more years. So he has his head on straight. He's just one of the best people I know, and he's doing okay.
And he's in the Maryland system?
Yeah, he is out in Cumberland. Yeah.
In Cumberland, maximum security. Yeah, that's super max right there. Yeah. How can they reach both of you? I know Undisclosed. Where is it at?
It's Undisclosed. Well, actually, you can find us on Twitter. It's pretty easy, but also it's undisclosed-podcast.com. I'm on Twitter at Rabia Squared, and I'm on Twitter all the time. So,
and I'm XO Amelia on Twitter. It's the best place to find me, or just go read rollingstone.com. Look for my stories.
Amazing.
And they're very active, I can tell you, on Twitter and social media.
You guys are having us.
Thank you for coming in. This was an awesome program.
Oh, my God.
family, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for calling in. Tomorrow, we'll be right back, 4 to 5 p.m. You know where to find us, dmvdaily.news. Have a blessed day.
WOLB Baltimore and WERQ FM HD3 Baltimore.
This check on traffic is sponsored